The scream tore through the frozen wilderness like a knife through silence, raw, desperate, and utterly human. Asher Hale froze mid-step, his breath hanging white in the mountain air. He knew the sound. He'd heard it before in a war he'd tried to forget. Somewhere in those snow-laden pines, one of his wolf traps had caught something it shouldn't have. And as his boots crunched toward that terrible cry, he had no idea he was walking toward the one person who would change everything. Stay with me until the end and comment your city below so I can see how far this story travels. The Arizona Territory stretched cold and merciless that winter of 1878, 3 years after the last Apache Wars had supposedly ended. Supposedly. Asher Hale knew better than to trust the word of politicians or generals. He'd learned that lesson in blood and gunpowder, and it had cost him more than just the limp that now marked his gait through the deep snow. His trapline ran 15 miles through the high country, a serpentine trail through ponderosa pines and Douglas fir that marked the boundary between the world of men and the world of wild things. Asher preferred the latter. Animals at least were honest about their nature. They killed to eat, defended their territory, and didn't pretend their violence served some higher purpose. The morning had started like any other. He'd risen before dawn in his cabin, a solid structure of pine logs and river stone that he'd built with his own hands, every notch, and mortise a declaration that he was done taking orders. Coffee boiled black and bitter on his cast-iron stove. Bacon sizzled. The routine was sacred because it was his own. He'd checked the first 7 traps without incident. 2 held rabbits, their bodies frozen stiff in the night. 1 had been sprung but empty, a coyote probably smart enough to steal the bait without paying the price. The 8th trap, the one he'd set near the frozen creek bed where wolf tracks had been thick, was still ahead when he heard it. The scream. It wasn't the shriek of an animal. Asher had heard enough of those to know the difference: the yowl of a cougar, the death cry of a deer, the sharp yelp of a fox. This was human, female, and it carried within it a quality that made his blood run cold, not just pain, but the kind of terror that comes from knowing you might die alone. His hand went instinctively to the rifle slung across his back, fingers finding the worn walnut stock. Old habits. The war might be over, but the soldier in him would never fully die. He moved toward the sound, his boots breaking through the crusty snow with each step. The wind had picked up, carrying with it the scent of pine resin and something else, the copper tang of blood. Christ, he muttered, pushing through a stand of juniper, and then he saw her. She was caught in his number 4 wolf trap, the one with jaws strong enough to hold a 100-pound timber wolf. But this was no wolf. This was a woman young, maybe 20, with long black hair that spilled across the snow like ink on paper. Her skin was the warm brown of the Apache people, and she wore a buckskin dress that was torn and stained with travel. The trap had her left leg just above the ankle, its iron teeth buried deep in flesh and leather. Blood pooled beneath her stark crimson against the white snow steaming in the cold air. Her eyes found his dark, fierce, filled with agony and something else, defiance. Even caught and bleeding, she looked at him not with pleading, but with the hard stare of someone who expected the worst and was prepared to face it. Asher's mind raced through possibilities, each more complicated than the last. An Apache woman alone in his territory in winter. Either she was running from something or toward something, and neither option was good. The reservation was 40 miles south. The nearest Apache settlement, if any remained, was even farther. He should leave her. The smart thing, the safe thing would be to turn around and let nature take its course. The wars might be officially over, but the hatred wasn't. A white man helping an Apache woman would bring nothing but trouble from all sides. She spoke then, her voice strained but steady. The words were Apache, but he caught the meaning in her tone. She was telling him to go, to leave her. "Can't do that," he said, more to himself than to her. He unslung his rifle, leaning it against a tree, and approached slowly, hands visible. She watched him like a cornered animal, her breath coming in sharp gasps that sent clouds of vapor into the freezing air. "I'm going to open the trap," Asher said, knowing she might not understand English, but hoping his tone would convey his intent. "It's going to hurt worse before it gets better." He knelt beside her in the blood-stained snow. Up close, he could see the full extent of the damage. The trap had done its job too well. The iron teeth had penetrated deep, possibly to the bone. Her foot was already swelling, the leather of her moccasin splitting from the pressure. She said something else in Apache, her hand moving to the knife at her belt. "Easy," Asher said, showing his palms. "I'm not the enemy here." But he was, wasn't he? He'd worn the blue uniform. He'd fought in the campaigns that had driven her people from their ancestral lands. His hands had pulled triggers that had ended Apache lives. The fact that he'd hated every moment of it, that he'd deserted before the final bloody push, didn't change the history written in gunsmoke and grief. He examined the trap's mechanism, his fingers working carefully around the spring. "I need you to stay still," he said. "When I open this, you're going to want to pull away. Don't. Let me control it, or you'll tear yourself worse." She watched him, her jaw clenched so tight he could see the muscles working beneath her skin. Then, to his surprise, she gave a single sharp nod. Her hand found his wrist, suddenly gripping with surprising strength, not threatening, anchoring. Her eyes locked onto his, and he understood. She was preparing herself, using him as an anchor point against the pain to come. "On 3, he said. 1, he released the trap on 1, knowing that anticipation was sometimes worse than the act itself. The jaws sprang open with a metallic clang, and she screamed again, but this time the sound was muffled, bitten back behind clenched teeth. Her grip on his wrist tightened until he thought she might break bone, but he didn't pull away. Blood flowed freely now, no longer dammed by the pressure of the iron. Asher worked quickly, pulling a bandana from his coat pocket and wrapping it tight around the wound. It soaked through immediately, but it would have to do until he could get her somewhere with proper supplies. "Can you walk?" he asked, already knowing the answer. She tried. He watched her gather herself, saw the determination in her eyes as she attempted to put weight on the injured leg. She made it perhaps an inch off the ground before her face went white and she collapsed back into the snow. "That's what I thought," Asher said. He shrugged out of his heavy coat, laying it across the snow. "I'm going to carry you. You can fight me if you want, but you'll just bleed out faster." She looked at him for a long moment, and he could see the war happening behind her eyes. Pride versus survival. Trust versus years of betrayal and violence. Finally, she spoke in English, heavily accented but clear. You are soldier." It wasn't a question. "Was," Asher corrected, "not anymore." "Soldier, always soldier," she said, and there was a lifetime of pain in those words. "Maybe," he admitted, "but I'm also the only chance you've got right now." He didn't wait for permission. He slid his arms beneath her, one under her knees, one behind her back, and lifted. She was lighter than he expected, probably hadn't eaten well in days, maybe weeks. She stiffened in his arms, every muscle rigid with distrust, but she didn't fight him. The walk back to his cabin was 2 miles through deepening snow. The wind had picked up, carrying the promise of a serious storm. Asher's leg, the one that had taken shrapnel at adobe walls, screamed with each step. His arms burned with her weight, but he'd carried wounded men farther than this through worse conditions, and he'd be damned if he'd fail now. She drifted in and out of consciousness as he walked. Sometimes she would mutter in Apache words he couldn't understand but recognized as prayers or curses. Once she gripped his shirt and said clearly, "Why? Don't know." He answered honestly, "Maybe I'm tired of walking away." He'd done it before, after all, walked away from his mom's post, from his duty, from his brothers in arms, when he couldn't stomach one more campaign against people who were only defending their homes. He'd walked away and kept walking until he found this piece of nowhere that no one else wanted. But walking away from a war and walking away from a dying woman were different things. The cabin appeared through the trees like a refuge from a fever dream. Smoke still rose from the chimney he'd banked the fire before leaving, and it had held. He kicked the door open and carried her inside, laying her on his bed, the only bed by the far wall. She was fully unconscious now, her breathing shallow and rapid. Shock was setting in. Asher moved with the efficiency of long practice. He built up the fire until the cabin glowed with heat. He put water on to boil. From a trunk under the window, he pulled out his medical kit, Army issue stolen when he deserted, but well maintained. Needle and thread, carbolic acid, laudanum, bandages. He cut away the remains of her moccasin and the lower part of her buckskin legging. The wound was worse than he'd thought. The trap had torn through skin and muscle, exposing the bone beneath. It would need stitching, cleaning, and prayer. As he worked to clean the wound with boiled water and carbolic acid, she woke with a gasp, her hand shooting out to grab his arm. "Easy," he said, his voice low. "I have to clean it or you'll lose the leg. Maybe your life." Her eyes were wild with pain and fear, but after a moment she released his arm and turned her head away, presenting her neck in a gesture of submission that made something in Asher's chest twist with anger, not at her, but at whatever had taught her that survival sometimes meant surrender. "You don't have to do that," he said quietly. "Not here, not with me." She turned back to look at him, confusion breaking through the pain. "I mean it." Asher continued, threading the needle with practiced hands. "You're safe here, or as safe as anywhere else in this God-forsaken territory." "Safe?" she repeated, testing the word. Then she laughed, a bitter sound that turned into a gasp as he began to stitch. "No place safe." "Maybe not," he agreed, working the needle through torn flesh, with steady hands that had sewn up too many wounds to count. "But you're not bleeding out in the snow, so it's an improvement." She gripped the edge of the bed frame, her knuckles white as he worked. He'd seen grown men weep with less pain, but she made no sound beyond sharp intakes of breath. "What's your name?" he asked, partly to distract her, partly because he needed to call her something other than the Apache woman in his head. She was silent so long he thought she wouldn't answer. Then, "Nah." "Nah," he repeated. It meant mother or grandmother in Apache, if he remembered correctly, a name that carried weight. "I'm Asher Hale." "Hale," she said, pronouncing it carefully, "like ice from sky." "Like ice from the sky," he confirmed. "My father had a strange sense of humor." He tied off the last stitch and began wrapping her leg in clean bandages. The bleeding had slowed to a seep. It was the best he could do without a real doctor, and the nearest doctor was in town, a place he avoided, and a place she could never go safely. "You need to drink this," he said, measuring out a dose of laudanum into a tin cup and diluting it with water. "For the pain." She eyed the cup suspiciously. "It's medicine," he explained. "It'll help you sleep. You need rest to heal." "You poison me," she said, but there was no real accusation in it, just statement of possibility. "If I wanted you dead, I'd have left you in the trap," Asher pointed out. She considered this logic, then took the cup and drank it in one swallow, making a face at the bitter taste. "It tastes like poison," she observed. "Most medicine does," he agreed. He watched as the laudanum took effect, saw her eyelids grow heavy and her breathing deepen. Just before sleep claimed her, she spoke again so quietly he almost missed it. "You stitched it, yes? Why you help enemy?" Asher looked down at her, at this broken woman who represented everything he'd tried to leave behind: the war, the violence, the impossible choices between duty and conscience. "Maybe I don't see an enemy," he said finally. "Maybe I just see someone who needed help." But she was already asleep, her chest rising and falling with the rhythm of deep unconsciousness. Asher stood, his back cracking from being bent over the bed. The storm that had been threatening all day had finally arrived in full force. Wind howled around the cabin, seeking entrance through every crack and crevice. Snow began to pile against the windows. He looked around his one-room sanctuary, the bed where she slept, The single chair by the fire where he would spend the night, rifle across his lap, watching. The door that might open at any moment to bring trouble, in the form of bounty hunters, soldiers, or Apache warriors seeking their missing tribeswoman. He'd built this cabin to be alone, to escape the world and its complications. But now a stranger slept in his bed, her blood on his hands, literally and figuratively, and the storm was only beginning. Asher settled into his chair, feeding another log to the fire. Outside, the wind shrieked like all the ghosts of all the wars that had ever been fought. Inside, a fragile peace held built on nothing more substantial than a moment's choice in the snow. He'd stopped walking away, at least for now. Whatever came next would be a consequence he'd have to face. The fire crackled, the wind howled, Na slept, and Asher Hale, former soldier, current hermit, and reluctant savior, kept watch through the long winter night, wondering what in God's name he'd gotten himself into. The storm raged for 3 days, and in that time, the world shrank to the dimensions of a single room. Asher woke on the second morning with his neck stiff from sleeping in the chair, the fire reduced to glowing embers. The first pale light of dawn filtered through the snow-crusted windows, casting everything in shades of gray and white. He stood slowly, his bad leg protesting every movement, and checked on his unwelcome guest. Na was awake, watching him with those dark, unreadable eyes. She hadn't moved from where he'd left her, but he could see the tension in her body, the way she held herself ready despite the injury, despite the weakness that blood loss had brought. "How long?" she asked, her voice rough from disuse. 2 days, Asher replied, moving to the stove to restart the fire. "The storm's still going. We're snowed in." She absorbed this information silently, her gaze tracking his movements around the cabin. He could feel her cataloging everything: the rifle on its pegs above the door, the knife block by the cutting board, the windows and their potential for escape. She was a prisoner here, whether he intended it or not, and they both knew it. "You hungry?" he asked, not looking at her as he coaxed the fire back to life. "Yes." At least she was honest. He pulled out his store's salt pork beans, a few withered potatoes that had survived from autumn. Not much of a feast, but it would keep them alive. He set about preparing a simple stew, aware of her eyes on him the entire time. "You need to drink," he said, filling a cup with water from the bucket by the door. He brought it to her, stopping a careful distance from the bed. She pushed herself up on her elbows, wincing at the movement. Pride kept her from accepting help, so he simply set the cup on the small table beside the bed and returned to his cooking. He heard her drink, heard the cup return to the table. The silence stretched between them like a rope pulled taut, ready to snap. "You were soldier," Na said finally. It was the same statement from before, but this time it carried the weight of certainty rather than question. "Yes," Asher admitted, stirring the pot. No point in denying what she could probably read in every move he made. "You fight my people." "I fought a war," he said carefully. "Whether they were your people or mine, I did what I was told. Until I couldn't anymore. Cannot anymore, or would not." Asher turned to look at her then. She had managed to sit fully upright, her injured leg extended her back against the wall. Even weakened, even trapped, she carried herself with a dignity that made something in his chest ache. "Would not," he said. "There's a difference between following orders and following them off a cliff. You run away." "I walked away," he corrected, "and I kept walking until I found a place where no one would ask me to kill for reasons I didn't believe in." She studied him for a long moment. "You are coward." The word should have stung, but Asher had called himself worse in the dark hours of too many nights. Maybe. Or maybe I just got tired of being brave for the wrong reasons. He brought her a bowl of stew, still steaming. This time he handed it directly to her, and after a brief hesitation she took it. Their fingers brushed in the exchange, and he felt her flinch at the contact. "It's hot," he warned. "Go slow." She didn't respond, but she did eat carefully, blowing on each spoonful before taking it into her mouth. He returned to the stove and filled his own bowl, then settled back into his chair by the fire. They ate in silence, but it was a different quality of silence now. Not quite comfortable, but not entirely hostile either. The storm continued to hammer at the walls, and Asher found himself grateful for it. Whatever complications waited outside could wait a while longer. "Your leg," he said when they'd both finished. "I need to check it, change the bandages." Na's jaw tightened, but she nodded. She understood necessity, even if she didn't trust him. He brought his medical supplies and worked with efficient, impersonal movements. The wound looked better than he'd feared, no signs of infection yet, though that could change. He cleaned it again with carbolic acid, ignoring her sharp intake of breath, and wrapped it in fresh bandages. "You do this before," Na observed. "Many times." "Too many times," Asher agreed. "War's good for teaching men to patch each other up, not good for much else." "You have limp," she said. "Your leg." He glanced at her, surprised she'd noticed. "Shrapnel. Adobe Walls 74. "Adobe Walls," she repeated, and her expression darkened. "I know this place. Many warriors die there." "Many soldiers, too," Asher said quietly. "More than the generals wanted to admit." She watched him finish bandaging her leg, her expression thoughtful. "You save enemy then, too." "I saved whoever I could," he said. "It was about all I could control." When he was done, he gathered up the soiled bandages and threw them into the fire. They caught quickly, sending up a brief, acrid smoke. "You should rest," he told her. "Healing takes time." "I do not want rest," Na said, frustration creeping into her voice. "I want to leave." "Can't. Not until the storm breaks and your leg's stronger." "You wouldn't make it 100 yards out there." She knew he was right, but that didn't make her like it. She turned her face toward the window, toward the white chaos beyond, and he saw her jaw work as she fought down whatever she was feeling. Asher left her to her thoughts and busied himself with small tasks, checking the chimney damper, sorting through his ammunition, sharpening his knife. Anything to give her space, to give them both space from the strange intimacy that sharing a cabin in a blizzard created. The hours crawled by. The wind never stopped, a constant howl that seemed to come from the throat of winter itself. By afternoon, the snow had drifted halfway up the windows, and the cabin felt less like a shelter and more like a tomb. "It sounds like it wants to tear this place apart," Na said suddenly, her voice cutting through the wind's scream. Asher looked up from the harness he was mending. "It won't. Built it myself. Every log, every stone, it'll hold." "You are certain as a man can be about anything he makes with his own hands." She considered this, then asked, "Why you build here so far from others?" "Because far from others is where I wanted to be," he said simply. "You have no woman, no family." "Had a family once, back in Missouri. Haven't seen them since I enlisted. Don't know if they'd want to see me if I went back." "Why?" Asher set down the harness and stared into the fire. "Because when I left for the war, I was their son, their brother. When I deserted, I became something else. A coward, like you said, or worse, a traitor. Some things you can't come back from." Na was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I understand this." There was something in her voice that made him look at her. She was staring at her hands, her expression distant. "What happened to you?" he asked. "How'd you end up alone out here in winter?" For a long time, he didn't think she would answer. The fire crackled. The wind howled. The world outside tried to bury them. "I run too," she said finally. "From reservation, from man they say I must marry. Old man, cruel man, I say no, but no one listened to woman, so I run." Asher felt something cold settle in his stomach. "They came after you. 2 men, warriors from my band. They catch me 3 days ago. They say I bring shame, that I must return." Her hands clenched into fists. "I fight, I escape, but I have nothing, no food, no blanket, no horse. I walk. I think maybe I die in snow, but better than go back. And then you found my trap." "Your trap find me," she corrected, a bitter smile touching her lips. "I am not good at being free, but I try." The weight of her words settled over them both. Two people running from different things brought together by chance and cruelty in equal measure. "The men who came after you," Asher said carefully, "they still looking. I do not know. Storm maybe kill them. Maybe they wait for spring." She met his eyes. "You are afraid they come here." "I'm afraid of a lot of things," Asher admitted, "but not afraid enough to put you back out in that storm." The second night fell, and with it came a strange sort of peace. They shared the coffee that Asher brewed thick and bitter, and Na didn't complain about the taste. She had propped herself higher in the bed, using his spare blankets, and some of the wariness had left her eyes. "You make good coffee," she said, which they both knew was a lie, but the effort at civility meant something. "You're a terrible liar," Asher replied, and was rewarded with something that might have been a smile. "My mother," Na said slowly, "she make coffee from acorns when we have no other. This better than acorn coffee." "That's about the kindest thing anyone said about my cooking." She took another sip, her expression thoughtful. "You are strange man, Asher Hale, soldier who run from war, white man who help Apache. You build house far from people, but you do not let stranger die." "Maybe I'm just contrary," he suggested. "Contrary." She tested the unfamiliar word. "Means I do the opposite of what's expected." "Yes," she said, and this time the smile was definite. "You are contrary." The storm began to break on the third day, the wind finally exhausting itself into occasional gusts. The snow stopped falling and weak sunlight tried to penetrate the clouds. Asher knew they had maybe a day, two at most, before another storm rolled in. Winter in the high country was like that, brief respites between onslaughts. He cleared the snow from the door and windows, creating narrow tunnels through the drifts. When he came back inside, stamping his feet and shaking off the cold, he found Na trying to stand. "What the hell are you doing?" he demanded, crossing the room in 3 strides. "I need to walk," she said through gritted teeth, one hand braced against the wall. "Cannot lie in bed forever." "You've been here 3 days and you nearly lost that leg. Sit down before you tear open the stitches." "I am not weak," she insisted, but her face had gone pale with pain and effort. "Being hurt doesn't make you weak," Asher said, reaching for her. "Being stupid about it does." She tried to wave him off, tried to take another step, and her injured leg buckled. He caught her before she could fall, and suddenly she was in his arms again, just like that first day in the snow. But this time she was conscious, fully aware, and the contact seemed to freeze them both. She looked up at him, and he looked down at her, and something passed between them that neither could name. Recognition, maybe, or the acknowledgement of a boundary crossed. He carried her back to the bed, gentler this time, and settled her against the blankets. She didn't protest, but he could see the frustration burning in her eyes. "I know you want to move," he said quietly, "but you've got to give it time. Another few days, maybe a week, and you can try again, with my help, if you'll take it." "I do not like help," Na said. "I noticed," Asher replied, "but sometimes we don't get what we like. We get what we need and we make do." She turned her face away, but not before he saw the glimmer of tears she refused to shed. Pride was a hard thing to maintain when your body betrayed you. That evening, as the light failed and he lit the oil lamps, she spoke again. "You say I am safe here, but you keep rifle by door, you watch windows. You are not so certain as you say." Asher paused in his task of adding wood to the fire. She was right, of course. He'd been on edge since finding her hyper-aware of every sound beyond the cabin walls. "Safe's relative," he admitted. "Safer than the snow, safer than most places you could be. But you're right, there's always danger. Men looking for you, or men who'd see you with me and make assumptions. This territory's got a long memory and a short temper." "You think about this," she said, "about what happened when someone find me here." "I think about a lot of things," Asher said. "Mostly I think about making it through one day at a time. And when I am healed, when I can walk, what then?" It was the question he'd been avoiding even in his own mind. What happened when she was well enough to leave? Where would she go? Back to the reservation meant a forced marriage, or worse. Staying here meant danger for them both. There were no good answers. "We'll figure it out when we get there," he said finally. "For now, you focus on healing. Everything else can wait." But even as he said it, he knew time was a luxury they might not have. Later that night, as Na drifted toward sleep under the influence of another dose of laudanum, she said something that caught him off guard. "You keep me safe today, when I fall." "That's what you do," Asher said, checking the fire one last time before settling into his chair. "You help people when they fall." "No," she said, her voice already thick with approaching sleep. "That is what you do. Most people walk away." He wanted to argue, to point out all the times he had walked away, all the people he hadn't saved. But she was already asleep, her breathing deep and even, and he was left alone with his thoughts and the quiet crackling of the fire. Outside, the stars emerged from behind the clearing clouds, cold and distant and uncaring. Inside, warmth held against the dark, fragile as hope and twice as dangerous. Asher pulled his rifle across his lap, not because he expected trouble that night, but because old habits died hard. He watched Na sleep, watched the steady rise and fall of her breath, and wondered at the strange mercy that had brought them to this moment. 3 days ago, he'd been alone just as he'd wanted. Now he was responsible for a life other than his own, and the weight of it settled on his shoulders like snow on pine branches, beautiful, heavy, and capable of breaking everything if it accumulated too fast. The storm had passed, at least for now, but Asher knew that the real storm, the one made of human complications and impossible choices, was only beginning to build on the horizon. He didn't sleep that night. He just watched and waited and wondered what the morning would bring. The morning brought clarity in more ways than one. Asher woke to find his supplies running dangerously low, coffee nearly gone, flour down to the last handful, salt pork reduced to a few strips that had seen better days. He'd planned to restock in town before the first serious snow, but that had been before he'd found Na bleeding in his trap, before his solitary life had become something more complicated. He stood at his pantry shelf, taking inventory with growing unease. Na watched him from the bed, her expression unreadable. "We are low," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yeah." He turned to face her. "I need to go to town, today while the weather holds." Her body tensed immediately. "You leave me here. I don't have much choice. It's either that or we both starve in about a week." She absorbed this, her fingers worrying at the edge of the blanket. "How long you be gone?" "Town's 8 miles. If the snow's not too deep, I can make it there and back in a day. I'll leave before dawn, be back by dark. And if you do not come back?" The question hung in the air between them. They both knew the possibilities: an accident on the trail, a confrontation in town if anyone recognized him as a deserter, or simply the choice to keep riding and leave his problems behind. "I'll come back," Asher said, and meant it. "Why, I believe you." It was a fair question. He set down the nearly empty coffee tin and crossed to the bed, kneeling so they were at eye level. "Because I could have left you in the trap," he said quietly. "Could have left you to die a dozen times since then. I didn't, and I'm not about to start now." She searched his face for a long moment, looking for the lie, for the betrayal she'd clearly learned to expect. Whatever she found there seemed to satisfy her because she gave a small nod. "I will be here," she said, "where else I go." He spent the rest of that day preparing. He banked the fire carefully, showing Na how to add wood without smothering the flames. He left his spare rifle within her reach, along with ammunition, and pretended not to notice when she checked to make sure it was loaded. "If anyone comes," he told her, "anyone at all, you shoot first and ask questions later. Understand?" "I understand, shoot," she said dryly. "This I know how to do." The next morning, Asher rose in the deep dark before dawn. He moved quietly, trying not to wake Na, but her eyes were open when he glanced at the bed. "You are leaving now," she said. "Yeah, while it's still early. Less chance of running into trouble. She pushed herself up to sitting, and he could see she'd grown stronger over the past days. The color had returned to her face, and she could move without the immediate flash of pain. "Asher," she said, and it was the first time she'd used his name without prompting. "Be careful. Town is dangerous for you too." Something in his chest tightened at the concern in her voice. "I'll be careful. You do the same." He wanted to say more, felt there should be something else, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, he checked his rifle one more time and stepped out into the pre-dawn cold. The ride to town was harder than he'd anticipated. The storm had left drifts 3 and 4 feet deep in places, and his horse struggled through them, breath steaming in the frozen air. By the time the sun crested the mountains, Asher was only halfway there, and his bad leg ached with a deep, bone-grinding pain. But it was the return journey that occupied his thoughts. How would he explain purchasing extra supplies? The town knew him as a solitary man, and any deviation from his routine would draw attention. He'd have to be smart about it, spread his purchases across different stores, make it look natural. The town of Redemption, named by optimistic settlers who'd clearly never lived there, came into view just after noon. It was a rough collection of buildings clinging to the side of a valley sustained by a played-out silver mine and the stubborn refusal of its inhabitants to admit defeat. Asher had chosen it for his supply runs precisely because it minded its own business, mostly because everyone had secrets they didn't want examined too closely. He hitched his horse outside Morrison's general store and stepped inside, grateful for the warmth. Sam Morrison looked up from behind his counter, surprise crossing his weathered face. "Asher, hail. Didn't expect to see you till spring." "Ran through supplies faster than planned," Asher said, keeping his voice casual. "Winter's been harder than expected." "Hasn't it, though?" Morrison pulled out his ledger. "What do you need?" Asher rattled off his list: flour, coffee beans, salt, pork, sugar. Normal supplies, nothing suspicious. He added a few extras that he could justify: a spool of thread needles, a bottle of laudanum to replace what he'd used. Morrison filled the order with the efficiency of long practice, but Asher could feel the man's curiosity like an itch between his shoulder blades. "Heard there was Apache trouble up in the high country," Morrison said conversationally as he wrapped the flour. "Couple of warriors from the reservation went missing few weeks back. Some folks are saying they went renegade." Asher's hands didn't shake as he counted out coins, but it took effort. "That's so?" "Yeah, sheriff's been asking around, seeing if anyone's spotted signs. You see anything unusual up your way?" "I see a lot of snow and not much else," Asher replied. "That's how I like it," Morrison chuckled. "Fair enough. Just thought I'd mention it. Never know when that sort of thing might turn into real trouble." Asher loaded his supplies and moved to leave, but Morrison called after him. "Oh, and Asher, Doc Hendricks mentioned he's got some medical supplies he's looking to sell off. Old Army surplus. Thought you might be interested, you being former military and all." It was a risk, but Asher needed proper bandages, maybe some better antiseptic. "Might stop by, thanks for the word." He made 2 more stops: the butcher for fresh meat that would keep in the cold, and the dry goods store for fabric that he claimed was for repairing his clothes. All the while he felt eyes on him, felt the weight of the town's attention. Redemption might mind its own business, but that didn't mean it wasn't watching. At Doc Hendricks's office, the old physician gave him a shrewd look. "Heard you were in town. Sam Morrison talks too much. He mentioned you had supplies." "I do." Hendricks gestured to a crate in the corner. "Army surplus, like I told Sam. Got bandages, carbolic acid, some instruments. You interested?" Asher examined the supplies with what he hoped was casual interest. "Might be. What are you asking?" They haggled briefly, and Asher walked away with enough medical supplies to properly care for a serious wound. Hendricks didn't ask why a hermit needed so much, and Asher didn't volunteer the information. As he loaded the last of his purchases onto his horse, a voice called out behind him, "Well, well, if it isn't the deserter." Asher turned slowly to find himself facing Jack Dalton, a man he'd served with briefly before deserting. Dalton wore a deputy's badge now, and his hand rested casually on his gun belt. "Dalton," Asher acknowledged, keeping his voice neutral. "Heard you were hiding out in the mountains. Figured you'd have frozen to death by now. Takes more than winter to kill some people." Dalton's eyes narrowed, taking in the supplies tied to Asher's saddle. "That's a lot of provisions for one man. Winter's long, I stock up when I can. Funny timing, though, coming to town right when we got Apache trouble brewing. You wouldn't know anything about that, would you?" Asher met his gaze steadily. "I know there's nothing up in my territory but snow and trees. That's all I need to know." "See that it stays that way," Dalton said. "Because if I find out you're harboring fugitives or causing trouble, that desertion charge might suddenly become interesting to my sheriff." "Understand." "Crystal clear," Asher said, swinging up into his saddle despite the protest from his bad leg. "One more thing," Dalton called as Asher started to turn his horse. "There's talk of a hunting party going up into the high country, looking for those missing Apache. If they're up there, we'll find them, might find other things too." It was a threat thinly veiled, but unmistakable. Asher nodded once and rode out of town, his heart hammering against his ribs. The return journey felt twice as long every shadow. A potential threat, every sound, a possible pursuer. By the time his cabin came into view, the sun was setting and his nerves were stretched thin as wire. He unloaded quickly, carrying the supplies inside in armfuls. Na was sitting up in bed, the rifle across her lap, and the relief on her face when she saw him was so naked it stopped him in his tracks. "You came back," she said, and there was wonder in her voice. "I said I would." "Yes, but saying and doing are different things." He set down the last of the supplies and closed the door, barring it securely. Only then did he allow himself to feel the full weight of what had happened in town. "We have a problem," he said, pulling off his coat. Na's expression shifted, became guarded. "What problem?" He told her about the conversation with Morrison, the encounter with Dalton, the hunting party that might be forming. With each word, he watched her face close off, watched the brief hope he'd seen when he returned disappear behind walls of resignation. "They are looking for me," she said when he finished. "The warriors who chase me, the town knows. Maybe, or maybe it's just talk, but either way, it means we can't stay hidden forever. Then I must leave. When I am strong enough, I go." "Go where?" Asher demanded. "Back to the reservation, where they'll marry you off to a man you don't want. Out into the wilderness to freeze or starve. There's no good option here, nah. Better than bring trouble to you. You save my life. I will not—" She struggled for the English words. "I will not make you pay for kindness." Asher crossed to the bed and sat on its edge close enough that he could see the flecks of amber in her dark eyes. "What if I don't want you to go?" he said quietly. The words hung between them, heavy with implications neither was quite ready to examine. "Why?" Na asked. "Why you risk everything for stranger, for enemy? Maybe because you're not a stranger anymore," Asher said. "And maybe I'm tired of living like the war's still being fought. Maybe I want to make a different choice this time." She reached out slowly, as if he might disappear if she moved too fast, and placed her hand over his. Her palm was warm, calloused from a life of work, and the simple contact sent something electric through him. "This is dangerous choice," she said. "Most worthwhile choices are." They sat like that for a long moment, hands touching eyes, locked the cabin around them, holding its breath. Then Na squeezed his hand and released it, breaking the spell. "Show me what you bring," she said, and he recognized it for what it was, a retreat to safer ground, at least for now. He showed her the supplies, and her eyes widened at the abundance. "This is much. Too much for one person. Good thing there's two of us then." She helped him put things away, directing him from the bed, and he found himself explaining his system for organizing the pantry. It was domestic and strange and somehow right, this quiet collaboration, this building of something that looked almost like a life together. That evening he cooked a proper meal for the first time in days. Fresh meat, potatoes, beans seasoned with the last of his herbs. Na watched from the bed, and when he brought her a plate, she ate with an appetite that pleased him more than it probably should have. "This is good," she said. "You cook well when you have food to cook. Practice. Learned young that if you want to eat something decent, you better know how to make it yourself." "I can cook," Na offered. "When I am better, I can help." "I'd like that," Asher said, and meant it. After dinner, as he cleaned the dishes and she watched the fire, she spoke again. "What we do, Asher, when they come looking." He'd been thinking about little else since leaving town. "We have some time, maybe a week, maybe two, before any hunting party gets organized. Weather might hold them off longer. We use that time to get you stronger, to figure out a plan." "What plan? I cannot stay. You cannot keep me. There is no path that does not end in trouble." Asher turned from the dishes to look at her. "Then maybe we make our own path, one that doesn't depend on what other people think we should do." "How?" "I don't know yet," he admitted. "But I've got a week to figure it out, and I've gotten out of tighter spots with less time and worse odds." She smiled, then a real smile that transformed her face. "You are crazy, man, Asher Hale." "Yeah," he agreed, "but crazy's kept me alive this long. Might as well see where it takes me." That night, as Na slept and Asher kept watch, he found himself thinking about Dalton's warning, about the hunting party, about all the ways this could end badly. But he also thought about the way Na had smiled, about the warmth of her hand on his, about the possibility that maybe, just maybe, there was a future here that didn't involve running or hiding or pretending to be dead inside. The fire burned low. The wind picked up again, not quite a storm, but a promise of one. And in the small circle of warmth and light, two people who had every reason to be enemies began to figure out how to be something else entirely. Asher checked the rifle one more time, looked at Na sleeping peacefully for the first time since he'd found her, and made a decision. Whatever came next, whoever came looking, they'd face it together. He was done walking away from fights that mattered. This one mattered. She mattered. And that changed everything. The days that followed took on a rhythm that felt almost normal, if normal could exist in such an impossible situation. Na grew stronger with each sunrise, and by the end of the first week, she could stand with only a wince of pain, could take a few careful steps while gripping the furniture for support. Asher watched her progress with a mixture of pride and dread. Every step she took toward recovery was also a step toward the decision they'd been avoiding. What happened when she was well enough to leave, or when trouble finally found them, whichever came first. On the 8th morning after his trip to town, Na stood without support for the first time. Asher had been adding wood to the fire when he heard her gasp behind him. He turned to find her on her feet, both hands raised slightly for balance, her face a mask of fierce concentration. "Look," she said, and there was something like triumph in her voice. He crossed to her slowly, hands out, in case she faltered. "Easy. Don't push too hard." "I am not made of glass," she said. But she swayed slightly, and his hands found her waist, steadying her. They stood like that, close enough that he could see the fine lines at the corners of her eyes, could smell the sage and smoke scent that clung to her hair. Her hands came up to rest on his shoulders, and for a moment the world narrowed to just the two of them, breathing the same air. "You are healing," he said quietly. "Yes." Something flickered in her eyes. "Soon I will not need you. Is that what you want? Not to need anyone?" She looked away, but her hands didn't leave his shoulders. "Need is dangerous. Need makes you weak." "Or maybe it makes you human," Asher suggested. "I've spent 3 years convincing myself I didn't need anyone. Hasn't made me stronger, just made me lonelier." Na's gaze returned to his face, searching. "And now, you are not lonely now." "No," he admitted. "Now I'm terrified because I've got something to lose again." Before she could respond, her leg trembled with the strain of standing, and he guided her back to sit on the edge of the bed. But as she sat, her hand caught his and held it. "I am terrified too," she said softly. but I do not know if it is because I must leave or because I do not want to. The confession hung in the air between them, heavy with possibility and danger in equal measure. Asher knelt before her, still holding her hand. "Then don't," he said. "Don't leave. You know, it is not so simple. I know, but I also know that I'm not ready to watch you walk out that door, not when—" He stopped, searching for words that wouldn't come. "Not when what?" Na pressed her fingers, tightening on his. "Not when I'm just starting to remember what it feels like to care about someone." She raised her free hand to his face, her palm rough against his bearded cheek. "Asher Hale, what are we doing?" "Something stupid," he said. "Something that might get us both killed, but something that feels right for the first time in a long time." She leaned forward and pressed her forehead to his, a gesture of intimacy that felt more profound than any kiss. They stayed like that, breathing together until she finally pulled back. "We must think," she said. "Must plan, cannot only feel." "You're right." He stood reluctantly. "You're right, but I don't have to like it." Over the next days they began to plan in earnest. Na could walk now, with only a slight limp could help around the cabin with increasing ease. She learned to make his coffee the way he liked it, still terrible, but consistently so. He taught her to load and fire his rifle standing behind her, to adjust her aim, trying not to notice the way his heart raced when she leaned back against his chest. But beneath the domestic routine, they both knew time was running out. The weather had held, and that meant the hunting party Dalton had mentioned would be able to move soon. They discussed options during the long evenings, but every path seemed to lead to the same dead end. "I could take you further north," Asher suggested one night, "into the mountains where they won't follow. And then what? I freeze, you freeze with me. I could bring you back to the reservation under cover of darkness. You could slip back in, pretend you'd been there all along." Na's laugh was bitter. "And the men who chased me, you think they forget? You think they not tell everyone I run, that I am shamed? Then we go somewhere else entirely. Colorado, California somewhere, no one knows us." "Running," she said. "Always running. Is this how you want to live?" "No," Asher admitted. "But I don't see another choice that keeps you safe." She was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. "Maybe safe is not what I need. Maybe I need to stop hiding who I am, what I want." "What do you want, Na?" She turned to look at him, and the raw honesty in her eyes nearly undid him. "I want to stay. I want to wake up in this cabin and drink terrible coffee and listen to you talk about things that do not matter. I want to be seen not as Apache or woman or thing to be owned, but as myself. I want—" Her voice cracked slightly. "I want to matter to someone the way you matter to me." Asher crossed to her and pulled her to her feet, his arms wrapping around her as if he could shield her from the whole cruel world. She melted into him, her face pressed against his chest. "You do matter," he said fiercely. "You matter more than anything has mattered in years." They stood like that until the fire burned low, and when they finally pulled apart, something had shifted between them. A decision made without words, a commitment spoken in the language of held gazes and racing hearts. "If I stay," Na said, "if we try this, it must be real. Not hidden, not secret. I will not be your shame. You could never be that. Then we must face town together. We must show them I am not prisoner, not conquest. That I choose this, choose you." The idea was audacious, probably suicidal, and exactly what needed to happen. Asher understood it instinctively. Hiding her would only confirm every terrible assumption people would make. But standing beside her, claiming her openly, that might give them a chance. A small one, but a chance nonetheless. "When?" he asked. "Soon. Before they come looking. We go to them first. They'll say terrible things about both of us." Na's smile was sad but determined. "They already think terrible things. At least this way, we control the story." 2 days later, Asher hitched his horse to the small cart he used for hauling supplies. Na stood in the doorway, wrapped in a wool coat he'd given her, her hair braided back in the Apache style she'd worn when he found her. She looked beautiful and fierce and absolutely terrified, though she was trying hard not to show it. "We don't have to do this," Asher said, securing the last strap. "We can wait, think of something else." "No more waiting," Na said. "I am done waiting for life to happen to me." She climbed into the cart, with his help favoring her injured leg only slightly now. Asher settled beside her and took up the reins, but before he could start the horse moving, she spoke again. "Asher, what will they say when they see me with you?" He turned to look at her, seeing the vulnerability beneath her courage. He reached over and took her hand, lacing his fingers through hers. "Doesn't matter what they say. You're with me. That doesn't change." The ride to town was quiet, each of them lost in their own thoughts, but their hands stayed clasped between them, a small defiance against the world that waited ahead. Redemption came into view just after noon, and Asher felt Na tense beside him. He squeezed her hand, and she squeezed back, drawing strength from the contact. They rode down the main street, and the effect was immediate. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. People turned to stare. A woman clutched her child closer. A man spat in the dirt as they passed. Asher kept his eyes forward, his back straight, every inch of him projecting a calm he didn't feel. Beside him, Na did the same, her chin lifted with a dignity that made his heart ache. He stopped the cart in front of Morrison's general store, knowing it would draw the most attention. As he helped Na down, he could feel the weight of dozens of eyes on them, could hear the whispers starting like wind through dry grass. "Well, I'll be damned," someone muttered. "The hermit's got himself a squaw," another voice said, dripping with contempt. Na's hand tightened on his arm, but she didn't flinch. Together they walked into the store. Sam Morrison looked up from his ledger, and his eyes widened. "Asher, I didn't expect that, He faltered clearly, at a loss. "Need some supplies, Sam," Asher said calmly. "Flour, sugar, coffee, if you've got it." Morrison's gaze flickered to Na, then back to Asher. "Right, of course, I'll get those for you." As Morrison gathered the supplies, the bell above the door rang, and Jack Dalton stepped in his deputy's badge, catching the light. His eyes went immediately to Na, and his hand moved to his gun belt. "Well, well," Dalton said. "Looks like we found one of those missing Apache after all." "She's not missing," Asher said evenly. "She's with me." "That's so. You got papers for her, because last I checked, Apache from the reservation need permission to leave. She doesn't need anyone's permission to be where she chooses." Dalton's smile was cruel. "That's not how the law sees it, Hale. That's an escaped Indian you got there. I could arrest her right now, take her back where she belongs." Na stepped forward, and when she spoke, her English was clear and deliberate. "I belong nowhere that I do not choose. I am here by my will. This man saved my life. He hurt no one. He take nothing that is not given freely." "You hear that, Dalton?" Asher said. "She's here by choice, not stolen, not captured. Her choice." A crowd had gathered outside the store, faces pressed against the windows. Dalton looked at them, then back at Asher and Na, clearly calculating his next move. "Her choice may be," Dalton said slowly, "but that doesn't change the law, and it doesn't change what people think about a white man living with an Apache woman like she's his." He paused deliberately. "Like she's his wife or something." The word hung in the air, half accusation, half mockery, but it also held a possibility that Asher seized upon. "Then maybe she should be," he said, the words coming from somewhere deep and certain, "my wife." The crowd's murmur became a roar. Morrison dropped a bag of flour. Dalton actually took a step back, stunned. Na turned to look at Asher, her eyes wide with shock, and something else, something that might have been hope. "You can't be serious," Dalton sputtered. "Dead serious," Asher said, never taking his eyes from Na's face. "If she'll have me." The question was implicit, hanging between them in front of the entire town. Na's hand found his, her fingers trembling slightly. "Yes," she said quietly at first, then stronger. "Yes." The crowd erupted. Some voices were angry, some disgusted, a few, very few, surprised into something like admiration. But Asher heard none of it. He was focused entirely on Na, on the tears gathering in her eyes, on the smile breaking across her face like sunrise. Dalton found his voice first. "This is insane. You can't just, there are laws." "Show me which law says I can't marry who I choose," Asher challenged. "Show me and I'll walk away right now." Dalton couldn't, because no such law existed, at least not in the Arizona territory. It was social suicide. It was scandalous. It might make their lives hell, but it wasn't illegal. "You're making a mistake," Dalton said finally. "Both of you." "Maybe," Asher agreed, "but it's our mistake to make." He turned to Morrison. "Do we have a justice of the peace in this town?" "Yes, Judge Carson. But Asher, you can't really mean to." "I do. Where can I find him?" Morrison, looking like a man who'd stumbled into someone else's nightmare, gave directions to the judge's office. Asher paid for his supplies, loaded them into the cart, and helped Na up beside him. As they rode through the hostile crowd toward the judge's office, Na leaned close and whispered, "You do not have to do this. Not because of them." "I'm not doing it because of them," Asher said. "I'm doing it because of you. Because I want it written down, spoken out loud, made real. I want everyone to know you're not just staying with me. You're choosing me, and I'm choosing you." "You are certain this will change everything?" "Everything already changed the moment I pulled you out of that trap," Asher said. "This just makes it official." Judge Carson was a gray-haired man with shrewd eyes who'd seen too much of humanity's worst to be shocked by much. But even he blinked when Asher laid coins on his desk and said, "We're here to be married." "You understand what you're doing, son?" the judge asked, looking between them. "The complications this will bring." "Better than most, I'd wager," Asher replied. The judge studied Na. "And you, miss, you're doing this of your own free will, no coercion, no force." Na met his gaze steadily. "I choose this, I choose him. Is this not how it should be?" Something in the judge's stern expression softened. "Yes, miss, that's exactly how it should be." He pulled out a ledger and a pen. "Let's make it legal, then." The ceremony was brief, witnessed by the judge's clerk, who'd been called in from the back room. The words were simple promises to honor and cherish, to stand together against whatever came. When Asher slipped the juniper ring he'd carved in secret over the past nights onto Na's finger, his hands were steady. When she said, "I do," her voice was clear and strong. "By the power vested in me by the Arizona territory." Judge Carson said, "I pronounce you husband and wife." Asher kissed her, then gently, reverently, and felt her lips curve into a smile against his. They stepped out of the judge's office into the afternoon sun to find half the town waiting their faces, a mixture of outrage, curiosity, and hostility. Asher felt Na falter slightly, and he pulled her closer to his side, but something had changed in her bearing. She stood taller now, her hand wearing his ring, her status transformed from fugitive to wife. When she looked at the crowd, there was no apology in her eyes, only a quiet challenge to see her as she was a woman who had chosen her own path. They walked together to the cart, and as they climbed up, a voice called out from the crowd, "You'll regret this, Hale." Asher turned to look at the speaker, then let his gaze sweep across the assembled faces. "The only thing I regret," he said clearly, "is all the time I wasted caring what people like you think." He snapped the reins and they rode out of town, leaving the uproar behind. Neither of them spoke until redemption was out of sight. Then Na let out a breath that might have been a laugh or a sob or both. "We did it," she said, wonder in her voice. "We actually did it." "We did," Asher agreed. "No going back now." "Do you want to go back?" He looked at her, his wife, this fierce, beautiful woman who'd stumbled into his trap and changed everything, and shook his head. Not for anything in the world. As they rode toward home through the gathering dusk, Na leaned against his shoulder and he wrapped his free arm around her, holding her close. The cabin waited ahead, their cabin now filled with the promise of a future they'd build together, one defiant choice at a time. Whatever came next, hatred, isolation, trouble, they'd face it as they'd face the town together, unashamed and absolutely certain that some things were worth fighting for. Love was one of them, freedom was another, and the right to choose your own life, your own happiness, despite what the world said you deserved, that was worth everything. The cabin felt different when they returned that evening, transformed by what had happened in town. It was no longer just Asher's refuge from the world. It was theirs, a home they would build together from this moment forward. Na stood in the doorway for a long moment, looking at the simple room with new eyes. The bed where she'd healed, the table where they'd shared meals, the fire that had kept them warm through storms, both literal and otherwise. Then she turned to Asher, and he saw something in her expression he'd never seen before, complete certainty. "Show me," she said quietly. "Show you what? Show me this is real, that I am not dreaming, that I am truly your wife and you are truly my husband." Asher crossed to her slowly, giving her every chance to change her mind, to pull back. But she didn't. Instead, she reached for him, her hands finding the buttons of his shirt with steady fingers. "Nah," he said, his voice rough. "Are you sure?" "I have never been more sure of anything," she said, and kissed him. What followed was tender and slow, a conversation spoken in touches and whispered words, in the gentle exploration of two people learning what it meant to belong to each other. Asher had known physical intimacy before, quick and meaningless, but this was different. This was Na's fingers, tracing the scars on his chest, her lips against the shrapnel wound in his leg, her body fitting against his like she'd been made for exactly this moment. And when she cried out his name in the darkness, when he buried his face in her hair and felt her heart beating against his, Asher understood that he'd been only half alive until now. Everything before this had been survival. This was living. Afterwards, they lay tangled together in the bed, the fire casting dancing shadows on the walls. Na traced the juniper ring on her finger, turning it slowly. "I never thought I would have this," she said softly. "A husband I choose, a home that is mine, freedom." Asher pulled her closer, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "You have it now, all of it, because of you, because you were brave enough to survive that trap, brave enough to trust me, brave enough to stand in that town and tell them all to go to hell without saying a word." She smiled against his chest. "We tell them together. That is better." They slept deeply that night, wrapped in each other and the warmth of the cabin, and for the first time in years, Asher's dreams were peaceful. The winter began to loosen its grip in the weeks that followed. The snow melted in patches, revealing the brown earth beneath. Na's leg healed completely, leaving only a faint scar and a slight hitch in her step when she was tired. She moved around the cabin with increasing confidence, making it truly theirs, hanging herbs to dry, rearranging the pantry, adding small touches that made the space feel lived in rather than merely occupied. Asher watched her transform his hermit's cave into a home and felt something in his chest expand with each change. When she began talking about planting a garden in the spring, he found himself planning where they'd put it, what they'd grow, as if there was no question they'd be here together to harvest it. One morning, as the first green shoots began to appear in the sheltered spots near the cabin, Na stood at the window looking out at the emerging spring. Asher came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "What are you thinking?" he asked. "I am thinking about seeds," she said, "about things that grow, about making something that lasts. We could plant next week if the weather holds. Whatever you want, beans, corn, squash." She turned in his arms to face him. "I want all of that. But Asher, I want more than garden. I want—" She paused, searching for the right words. I want to make something that matters, something that says we were here, we lived, we loved, not hiding, not ashamed. What did you have in mind? I do not know, but I think about that town, about those faces. They see me and see only Apache. They see you and see only deserter. They do not see us, two people who find each other in snow and ice and make something warm. Asher understood what she was saying, the need to be seen not as symbols or scandals, but as human beings who'd chosen each other. It'll take time. People like that don't change their minds easily. Then we give them time. We live our lives so well, so true, that maybe one day they see differently. She touched his face. Or maybe they never see. But we see, and that is enough. It was enough. More than enough. But Asher also knew that the world didn't always let you simply live in peace, no matter how much you deserved it. The trouble came on a morning when the sun was warm enough to promise true spring. Asher was outside splitting wood when he heard riders approaching. He set down his axe and moved to where his rifle leaned against the cabin wall but didn't pick it up. Not yet. 3 men rode into the clearing, Jack Dalton in the lead, flanked by 2 Apache men Asher didn't recognize. But Na did. He heard her sharp intake of breath from the cabin doorway. "Those are the men," she said quietly. "The warriors who chased me." Dalton dismounted, his hand resting on his pistol. "Morning, Hale. We need to have a conversation." "Say what you came to say," Asher replied, moving to stand beside Na. One of the Apache men spoke then, his English heavily accented but clear. "This woman belonged to our band. She is promised to another. She must return." "She belongs to herself," Asher said firmly. "And she's promised to me. We're married, legal and proper. Judge Carson can confirm it." The second Apache warrior spoke in their language, and Na answered him sharply, her voice filled with steel. The exchange grew heated, and though Asher couldn't understand the words, he understood the tone, demands and refusals, old grievances and new realities colliding. Finally, Na stepped forward, speaking in English so everyone could understand. "I am the daughter of the mountain people, but I am also wife to this man. I choose this. No one force me. No one take me. I am here because this is where I belong." "Your people say otherwise," Dalton interjected. "They filed a complaint. They want you back." "My people," Na said, and there was profound sadness in her voice. "They sell me to old man for horses and blankets. They do not see me as daughter, as woman, as person. They see me as property. Asher see me as myself. So I choose him, choose this life, choose freedom." The first warrior spoke again, his voice softer now, almost pleading. Na responded, and Asher heard his name in the Apache words, heard the emotion in her voice. When she finished, tears were streaming down her face, but her stance remained firm. "What did you tell them?" Asher asked quietly. "I tell them I am sorry. Sorry I bring shame, sorry I cannot be what they want, but I am not sorry for choosing life over duty, love over obligation." She wiped her eyes. "I tell them I am already dead to them. Let me stay dead and live in peace." The 2 Apache men exchanged long looks, having a silent conversation that excluded everyone else. Finally, the first one nodded slowly and spoke to Dalton. He says, Dalton translated, looking troubled, that if she is dead to them, then they have no claim on a ghost. But they also say the shame is hers to carry, that she is cast out from her people forever. Na's breath hitched, but she nodded. "I understand. I accept this. You accept it." The second warrior spoke directly to her in English now. "You accept never seeing your mother again, never going home, being outcast forever for this white man." "He is not just white man," Na said fiercely. "He is my husband. He is the one who saw me bleeding and did not walk away. He is the one who gave me choice when no one else would. So yes, I accept this, because he is worth it. This life is worth it." Asher moved to her side, taking her hand. "And if accepting it means standing against the whole damn territory, then that's what we'll do." The warriors looked at them standing together, hands clasped, united against the world. Something in their expression shifted, not approval exactly, but perhaps a grudging respect for the courage it took to make such a choice. The first warrior said something in Apache, and though Asher didn't understand the words, he heard the finality in them. It was a goodbye, a severance, the cutting of a tie that could never be mended. Na answered simply, "I know, I am sorry, but I am not wrong." The warriors turned their horses and rode away without another word, disappearing into the trees. Dalton remained looking uncomfortable. "This doesn't change anything with the town, you know," he said. "People still talk, still judge." "Let them talk," Asher replied. "We're not living for them." Dalton shook his head, but there might have been the faintest hint of admiration in his eyes. "You're either the bravest man I've ever met or the biggest fool." "Probably both," Asher agreed. "But I'm a married fool, and that makes all the difference." After Dalton left, Na collapsed against Asher, her body shaking with silent sobs. He held her, letting her grieve for what she'd lost, for the family and people she could never return to. It was the price of her freedom, and it was steep. "I am alone now," she whispered against his chest. "No," Asher said firmly, tilting her face up to meet his eyes. "You're not alone. You have me. You'll always have me." "Is it enough? Am I enough without my people, without—" He kissed her, then stopping the words. When he pulled back, he kept his forehead pressed to hers. "You're everything. Everything I didn't know I needed until you were here." They stood like that for a long time, holding each other against the weight of what had just happened. When they finally went back inside, something had changed again. Na had made her choice final, had burned the bridges behind her. There was no going back now, only forward. The next weeks brought a kind of peace they hadn't expected. They planted the garden together, Na teaching Asher the Apache way of planting beans with corn and squash, the three sisters that grew stronger together than apart. They repaired the cabin's roof, Na proving surprisingly adept with hammer and nails. They built a life from small moments and shared tasks, from morning coffee and evening fires, from the quiet companionship of two people who'd found in each other what the world had denied them both. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and crimson, Na spoke thoughtfully. "It is strange. I thought being cast out would feel like dying, but instead I feel more alive than ever, like I was sleeping before and now I am awake." Asher understood exactly what she meant. "I was sleeping too. For 3 years, just going through motions, existing but not living. You woke me up." "We wake each other up," she corrected, taking his hand. "That is how it should be." A month later, Na came to him with news that changed everything again, but this time in a way that filled them both with wonder rather than fear. "Asher," she said, her hand on her still flat stomach. "I believe I carry your child." For a moment he couldn't breathe, couldn't think. Then joy crashed over him like a wave, and he pulled her into his arms, lifting her off her feet. "Are you sure?" he asked when he finally set her down. "As sure as I can be. My body tells me things. I know the signs." A child, their child, a living symbol of everything they'd fought for, everything they'd chosen. Asher felt tears prick his eyes, and he didn't try to hide them. "We're going to be a family," he said, wonder in his voice. "We already are family," Na corrected gently. "But yes, soon we will be 3. That night, as they lay in bed planning for a future that suddenly felt real and possible, Asher thought about how far they'd come. From a scream in the snow to this moment, from enemies to lovers, from isolation to family. It seemed impossible, the kind of story people would shake their heads at, the kind of thing that shouldn't work, but somehow did. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked into the darkness. "Any of it?" Na was quiet for a moment. "I regret the pain I caused my mother. I regret that my child will not know their grandmother. But I do not regret choosing you. I do not regret choosing myself. Some things are worth the cost. Even if the cost was everything you knew. Especially then, because what I knew was cage, dressed as home. What I have now is home dressed as cabin in woods. I know which is real. Spring turned to summer and Na's belly grew round with their child. They made another trip to town for supplies, and this time the stares were different. Still judgmental, still hostile in places, but also curious. The fact that they'd stayed together, that their marriage was real and lasting, seemed to shift something in the collective consciousness. One woman even spoke to Na in the mercantile, asking when the baby was due. It was a small thing, barely civil, but it was something. A crack in the wall of hostility. As they rode home that day, Na said, "I think maybe change is possible. Not today, not tomorrow, but someday." "Maybe," Asher agreed, "but even if it's not, we have this. We have each other. We have our child coming. That's enough to build a world on." The baby came in late autumn as the leaves turned gold and the first frost touched the ground. Asher delivered his own son with shaking hands and a heart so full he thought it might burst. When the baby cried, strong and healthy, and Na laughed through her tears, Asher understood that this was what he'd been moving toward all along. Every choice, every step, every moment of pain and fear had led him here. They named him James after Asher's father, with the Apache name Nietzsche for strength. He was perfect, a blend of both of them, and when Asher held him for the first time, he made a silent promise that this child would grow up knowing love, knowing choice, knowing that who you are matters more than what the world says you should be. One evening when James was a few weeks old, Na sat nursing him by the fire while Asher prepared dinner. The domestic scene was so far from where either of them had started that it felt like a dream. "Do you remember?" Na said softly. "When you found me in trap, I thought you would kill me. I thought that was how I would die." "I remember," Asher said. "I almost walked away." "But you did not." "Why, really? Why?" Asher thought about that moment in the snow when he could have made the easy choice. "Because I'd walked away from too many things already. Because I was tired of being the kind of man who could ignore suffering. Because maybe somewhere deep down I knew that saving you might save me too." "And did it save you?" He looked at her, holding their son, at the life they'd built, from impossible circumstances, at the home they'd made from nothing but determination and love. "Yes, it saved me from being alone, from being half alive, from being someone who'd forgotten what it meant to care about another person more than survival." Na smiled, that radiant smile that still took his breath away. "Then we save each other, again and again, every day." As winter approached again a year after that fateful scream in the snow, Asher stood outside the cabin watching the first snowflakes begin to fall. Inside, Na sang softly to James in her language, teaching him the songs of a people he would know only through her voice. The garden lay dormant, waiting for spring. The cabin stood solid and warm against the coming cold. And somewhere in town, people were probably still talking about the hermit and his Apache wife, still judging, still condemning. But out here, in this clearing, in the pines, none of that mattered. Here, love had won. Here, mercy had triumphed over hatred. Here, two wounded souls had found each other and learned to live again, not despite their scars, but because of them, each broken piece fitting together to create something whole. Asher thought about the man he'd been, the soldier who'd walked away from war, the hermit who'd walked away from humanity, the broken man checking traps in the snow. That man still existed somewhere inside him, but he was different now. He had a reason to stay, to fight, to build rather than hide. Na appeared in the doorway, James bundled in her arms. "It is snowing," she observed. "Just like the day I found you." She came to stand beside him, and they watched the snow fall together, their son between them. "Not found," she corrected gently. "The day we found each other." And that Asher thought was exactly right. In the end, it wasn't about him saving her or her saving him. It was about two people who'd been lost, finding their way together, who'd been broken, learning to heal in each other's presence, who'd been silenced, discovering their voices in shared truth. The snow continued to fall soft and persistent, covering the world in white. Inside the cabin, the fire burned warm. The future stretched ahead, uncertain but possible, built on the foundation of choices made in love rather than fear. Asher Hale had once believed he was done with the world, that isolation was safety and connection was pain. But standing here with his wife and son, watching the snow transform the wilderness into something beautiful, he understood the truth. The love was the bravest choice of all, and mercy. True mercy was the strongest thing a person could offer. They had offered it to each other in that moment in the snow, and they would keep offering it every day, forward building a life that proved what the world claimed was impossible, that understanding could bridge any divide, that compassion could heal any wound, and that two people determined to see each other's humanity could create a future brighter than any past.